They closed Amabel Reedon's paper mill while the last sheet of royal law was still drying on its line. That was what made the insult clean enough for court. Not a raid, not a fire, not soldiers breaking looms or dragging workers through mud. Just first scribe Valenos standing in the wet heat of Ashreed paper mill with perfumed gloves, a polished decree tube, and Dragon King Cyrus Emberley beside him in black court armor, watching a smoke-darkened widow lose the work that had kept his kingdom's laws from burning false. "The crown thanks you for your years of service," Valen said. Service. Amabel looked at the vats of boiled dragonreed, the furnace ash silvering the rafters, the women turning pulp with scarred hands, the boys hanging fresh sheets along copper lines. Her husband had died coughing reed smoke into a cloth so royal decrees could outlive dragonfire. Her palms carried the same pale burns now. Valen called it service only after making sure it would not continue. He lifted the decree. By order of Dragon King Cyrus Emberley, royal paper supply shall transfer from Ashreed production to imported white parchment effective immediately. The workers went still. Outside the open mill doors, court clerks waited in clean boots, careful not to step in the black water channels feeding the press wheels. They had always hated coming here. Too much smoke, too much wet reed smell, too much proof that law needed labor before it became sacred. Amabel did not look at them. She looked at Cyrus. He had once sat beside her furnace before he was king, reading handmade blank books she had bound from dragonreed paper because the heat soothed his battle-sick blood. He had told her quietly, "You made silence hold." Now he stood in that same furnace light while Valen called her mill primitive. Cyrus's jaw tightened, but he did not contradict it. Amabel's voice stayed steady. Imported parchment does not keep wording beneath flame seal. Dragonreed paper did not judge truth. It did not expose lies out of mercy, loyalty, or magic. It held wording because dragonreed ash locked flame seal ink beneath the fiber instead of letting heat lift it away as smoke. Valen smiled with patient sorrow. "Mistress Reedon, that was once a reasonable concern. Modern ink-binding methods have advanced. Have they been tested under royal dragonfire? Certified by the first scribe's office." That is not the same answer. A murmur moved through the clerks. Valen's smile cooled. "Your grief has made you protective of old methods. My grief did not boil the reed, my hands did." Cyrus looked at her then. The look hurt because it remembered. But memory did not speak. Valen did. The kingdom cannot present smoke-stained sheets to foreign courts forever. The law must look like the power it carries. Amabel lifted one damp sheet from the drying line. It glowed faintly gray gold, fibers dense with dragonreed ash. Law should survive the fire that seals it. Looking clean is not the same as staying true. Cyrus stepped forward at last. For one breath, every worker watched him. "Amabel," he said quietly, "the court requires consistency. Valen has assured me the imported parchment passed review. Then you trust the review more than the paper that has never failed you." His eyes darkened. Valen's voice came gentle and public. "No one questions your devotion, but devotion cannot become resistance to necessary reform." There it was. The same word men used when they wanted a woman's life's work to bow politely before being replaced. Reform. Amabel laid the damp sheet back on the line. Do not call it reform because the hands being discarded are dirty. Cyrus looked toward the vats, then the workers, then the decree tube in Valen's hand. He did not ask why dragonreed paper alone held wording beneath flame. He did not ask what imported parchment did when the seal burned too hot. He did not ask why Valen had hurried the closure before the first shipment was publicly tested. Heinley said, "The royal contract is ended." He had ended a craft before asking it to face the fire that made it necessary. The room changed around those words. Not loudly. Something quieter broke. Amabel nodded once. Then the crown may carry its laws on paper that has never known fire. Valen's eyes sharpened. The mill will surrender all remaining royal stock. No. The word cut through the wheel water. Cyrus's gaze snapped to her. Amabel lifted her chin. You ended the contract. You did not buy the memory of my vats. Valen's tone hardened. Royal wording has touched these sheets, and my labor made them worthy to hold it. Cyrus moved half a step, as if to intervene between law and insult, then stopped, because he had already chosen which side wore polish. Amabel saw the stop. So did he. Private affection does not excuse public shame, Majesty, she said softly. The title landed where his name would have hurt more. Valen ordered the royal seal flame brought forward, perhaps to end the moment cleanly. Amabel could smell the difference before flame touched the new sheet. The imported parchment held oil on its surface. Dragon reed paper drank heat into its fibers. Valen had chosen the mill for the transition seal because success would humiliate ash reed in front of its own vats, and failure could be blamed on smoke, wet reed air, or old ash clinging to the room. Either way, he had expected the setting to serve him. A clerk placed the first new imported decree on a black iron stand before the mill furnace. The parchment was white, smooth, beautiful. Cyrus pressed his signet into red wax. Valen lowered the dragon flame lamp. The seal flared. The ink vanished. Not burned. Vanished. Line by line, word by word, the decree turned blank beneath the royal flame, leaving only Cyrus's signature floating over empty parchment. The workers gasped. Valen went still. A scrap of Amabel's dragon reed paper slipped from the drawing line and landed beside the blank decree. Gold words surfaced across its gray fibers. Not new words. Not accusation. The original wording of the law Cyrus had just signed, held in the heat memory of reed, ash, and labor. Amabel looked at the glowing scrap, then at the king who had closed her mill, before asking why it had never lied to his fire. The dragon reed paper had not defended her. Not yet. It had only shown that the clean decree could not remember what the dirty paper still knew. Law sealed by dragonfire needed fiber that had survived dragonfire first. The dragon reed paper had not cleared Amabel. It had only proved the imported parchment could not hold law beneath dragonfire. That distinction mattered. Valenos found it before anyone else did. Seal failure, he said, voice calm enough to steady the clerks who had begun backing away from the blank decree. Possibly temperature imbalance from the mill furnace. Possibly airborne ash interference. This room is saturated with wet reed vapor. Amabel looked at the white parchment on the iron stand. Cyrus's signature still floated over emptiness, royal and useless. My mill did not lift the words, she said. The flame did. Valen turned with a sorrowing patience that made every insult sound reasonable. Mistress Reedon, you cannot know that. Your entire facility breathes ash. Old dragon reed fibers are hanging above us. A scrap from your own line just fell beside a royal test. A test you chose to perform here. His eyes narrowed for half a breath. Cyrus saw it. Not enough to accuse. Enough to notice. The Dragon King stepped toward the iron stand. No apology crossed his face. No soft word reached for Amabel, but his hand stopped before touching either sheet. Preserve both, he said. Valen inclined his head. Majesty, the imported decree can be rewritten. No. Preserve the blank imported decree and the dragon reed scrap under witness seal. The workers watched the order move through the mill like a cautious flame. 2 crown recorders came forward with glass frames and silver tongs. They sealed the blank parchment first. Then they sealed the gray scrap, its gold words still visible in the heat memory of reed ash and labor. Amabel did not thank him. A king could seal a failed decree. and still leave the woman who warned him standing in a closed mill. Cyrus looked at her as if he heard the thought. She looked away first. "Open the flame test ledger," he ordered. Valen's mouth tightened. "Majesty, those tests were certified through my office. Then the ledger should strengthen your position." The first ledger arrived in blue leather, too clean for the mill. Its pages smelled of cabinet oil, not furnace smoke. A junior clerk opened it with fingers that trembled when ash dust settled on the margin. Cyrus said, "Read the heat source." The clerk swallowed. "Imported parchment trial 1. Clerk. Lamp heat." Amabel's eyes lifted. Cyrus's voice lowered. "Read the next. Trial 2. Clerk. Lamp heat with red wax pressure. And the king's full dragonfire seal?" The clerk turned the page. Then another. "There is no recorded full seal test, Majesty." The mill went quiet, except for the water wheel groaning under the floor. Cyrus had ended the mill before learning the new paper had never faced the flame his own laws required. Valen stepped in smoothly. "Full seal testing is ordinarily unnecessary after office certification. Clerk lamp heat simulates controlled flame contact without risking royal materials." Amabel spoke before Cyrus could. "A candle does not simulate a dragon." One of the women at the pulp vat made a sound too small to be called a laugh and too bitter to be grief. Valen faced the room. "Modern parchment cannot be judged by rustic superstition. The crown requires uniform presentation for foreign courts. White law sheets inspire confidence." "Clean paper is not honest paper," Amabel said. Cyrus's gaze moved from the blank decree to the glowing scrap. "Open the Ashreed comparison tests." Valen paused. "Those are old supply records. Open them." A second ledger came from Amabel's own shelf, carried by a millboy with blackened cuffs. He brought it to her first out of habit. She did not take it. "Give it to the recorder," she said. "Let the court learn to read smoke." The recorder opened the worn book. Unlike Valen's ledger, this one carried stains, pressed reed dust, and small notes in Amabel's tight hand. "Dragon reed sheet. Batch 47, the recorder read. "Flame seal ink locked under full royal dragonfire. No wording lift. Fiber bond stable." Cyrus looked at Amabel. "Fiber bond?" She kept her voice even. "Dragon reed ash opens when heated. The ink sinks below the surface before the flame can strip it away. Imported parchment holds oil above the fiber. Heat lifts the ink like smoke." Valen smiled thinly. "A craft theory. Valuable in its place, but not binding on procurement." "My hands did not resist reform," Amabel said. "They resisted law becoming blank under flame." Cyrus turned to the crown clerks. "Open the procurement contract." Valen's expression cooled. "In the mill?" "In the room where the failure occurred." The contract case was brought from a carriage outside. Its seal bore Valen's office mark and the importer's blue ribbon. Cyrus did not break it himself. He nodded to the witness recorder. The recorder read, "Supplier guarantee? White law sheets suitable for foreign court presentation, smooth surface, low smoke scent, no visible ash residue." Cyrus's jaw flexed. "Full dragonfire retention?" The recorder scanned the page. "Not listed." Valen answered quickly. "It is implied by royal use." Was the contract approved before full fire testing? The silence was small. Then the clerk said, "Yes, Majesty." He had signed away Ashreed on a promise that had avoided the only test Amabel had asked for. Amabel looked at Cyrus. "You trusted the paper because it looked clean? The fire trusted the paper that remembered work." The words struck him visibly. He did not defend himself. He did not ask forgiveness. He only turned to the recorders. "Amabel Reedon is granted temporary paper, witness standing for flame test review, procurement comparison, and material examination. The mill closure remains pending review. Pending. Not reversed. Not repaired. Amabel's chin lifted. Do not call me witness while my mill is still treated as the stain. Cyrus accepted the blow without moving toward her. Your objection will be recorded. Valen's gaze sharpened. Majesty, granting standing to an emotionally invested supplier may compromise review. Cyrus looked at the blank decree. So may. Excluding the only person who knew the material would fail. The import certification file was opened last. Its final note was written in a neat office hand. Do not test imported parchment under King's full seal until Ashreed contract is terminated. Valen did not flinch. That was worse. A guilty fool panicked. A court scribe with prepared language only reached for procedure. Transition sequencing, Valen said. Not concealment. Full seal testing after supplier adoption is standard when legacy stock may contaminate results. Amabel looked from the note to the closed vats behind her. The line did not name a traitor. It named a sequence. Close Ashreed first. Test truth later. The line did not name a traitor. It named a sequence. Close Ashreed first. Test truth later. Valen Oss let that sequence sit in the wet heat of the mill without fear. That was what made him dangerous. A lesser man would have reached for anger. Valen reached for process. Transition sequencing, he repeated, folding his gloved hands before the sealed blank decree, not concealment. When legacy stock may contaminate results, full adoption must precede final sovereign testing. Otherwise, old materials, old ash, old habits, and old sentiment interfere with objective certification. Amabel Reedon looked past him to the dragon reed sheets hanging above the vats. Old ash, old habits, old sentiment. That was what he called the work that had kept royal law readable under dragonfire for 3 reigns. My mill was not old because it smoked, she said. It was old because it had survived every fire your law required. A few workers lifted their heads. Cyrus Emberley did not look away from her this time. That did not repair anything. It only proved he had stopped hiding behind Valen's cleaner language. Open certification custody, Cyrus ordered. Valen inclined his head. Of course, Majesty. Too smooth. The custody roll was brought from the first scribe's carriage in a narrow lacquer case. It looked absurd inside Ashreed paper mill, where everything useful was damp, blackened, scarred, or warm. The case had never known pulp water. It had never known furnace breath. It had never carried anything heavier than a polished excuse. The Crown Recorder broke the seal. Certification file received by first scribe's office 22 days before mill closure, the recorder read. Imported parchment approved for presentation review. Full retention review pending supplier conditions. Cyrus's voice lowered. Supplier conditions? The recorder turned the page. Testing environment to be free of ashreed residue, dragonreed vapor, local ash fibers, and legacy stock influence. Valen spoke at once. Reasonable. A new material deserves a clean environment. Amabel's mouth tightened. Law does not meet clean environments. It meets dragonfire. Cyrus's gaze moved to the sealed blank decree. He had signed away Ashreed on a paper that had been protected from the only heat that mattered. Open supplier testing records, he said. The supplier book was thinner than the mill ledger. Its pages were white and crisp, written in purple ink that smelled faintly sweet. It listed smoothness, brightness, fold strength, surface uniformity, scent reduction, and court presentation value. The recorder read the flame entries last. Clerk lamp exposure, low heat, no visible scorch. Clerk lamp exposure with wax press. Acceptable. Candle edge proximity. Acceptable. Cyrus's jaw hardened. No dragonfire. No majesty. Valen gave a measured sigh. Again, full dragonfire testing was postponed to avoid false failure from legacy contamination. Amabel turned to him. Do not call it transition when the only thing moved first was the woman who could prove failure. The room went quiet. A water drop fell from a beam into the black channel below. Cyrus's hand closed once at his side. He did not touch her. He did not speak gently. Perhaps he finally understood that gentleness, after public dismissal, could become another way of taking. He turned to the recorders instead. Amabel Reedon's temporary paper, witness standing, expands to certification custody and supplier testing records. Valen's eyes sharpened. Majesty, she is a displaced supplier with financial interest. A displaced supplier whose material just held my law when yours went blank? Amabel looked at him. Do not make my standing sound like favor. It will be recorded as necessity. Necessity is what the court names women after it is done calling them stains. Cyrus absorbed that without defense. Good. The mill closure order still hung from Valen's tube. The vats behind Amabel were cooling. The workers had not been told to resume. Pulp thickened in silence. A sheet left too long on the line curled at the corner, and one of the boys reached for it before remembering he no longer knew whether he was allowed to save Crown stock. The boy's fingers hovered over the curling corner as if saving it might become theft. Amabel saw that fear and hated Cyrus for noticing it too late. So did Cyrus. His face changed, but he did not reopen the mill. He could open every file in the mill and still not put heat back into the cooling vats. Open procurement approval, Cyrus said. Valen's smile returned, smaller now. That approval was tied to a diplomatic deadline. Foreign courts were complaining of smoke scent on Emberley decrees. The recorder confirmed it. Procurement approval expedited for foreign court presentation deadline. White parchment preferred for visual dignity, low residue, and ceremonial modernity. Amabel laughed softly. No joy in it. Visual dignity, she said. You closed a mill because law smelled like the people who kept it from burning away. Valen's voice cooled. The crown cannot appear provincial. No, she said. It only became blank. The words struck the room harder than a shout. Cyrus turned to the budget column. Read the funding source. The recorder hesitated. Valen's eyes moved to the page. For the first time. Not panic. Calculation. Read it, Cyrus said. The recorder obeyed. Appearance premium paid from royal law. Preservation budget. The furnace gave a low iron groan behind Amabel, as if the old mill itself had heard the insult. Valen did not deny the number. Denial was for men without language prepared. The line did not prove every hand behind the replacement. It proved the budget meant to preserve law had been taught to buy appearance instead. One vat woman wiped pulp from her wrist and stared at the budget column as if the number had named her hands unnecessary. Money meant to preserve law had bought whiteness instead. And every worker in Ashreed Paper Mill understood at once that their dirty hands had not been replaced by better craft. They had been replaced by a cleaner lie, written on paper that had never been asked to survive the truth of fire. The budget line did not yet name a thief. It named what the court had decided was worth preserving. Not wording, not fire retention, not the workers whose lungs learned smoke before royal clerks learned ink. Appearance. Valenos did not deny the number. Denial was for men without language prepared. The law preservation budget includes public trust presentation, he said. A decree must not only endure. It must be received as legitimate by foreign courts, border houses, and common readers. Appearance is not vanity. It is governance. Amabel Reedon looked at the cooling vats behind her. The pulp was thickening. One vat woman still held her paddle in both hands, as if letting it go would admit the work was dead. Do not call it public trust when the public cannot read a law after your fire touches it, Amabel said. Cyrus Emberley's eyes moved to the sealed blank decree. No one had touched it since the words vanished. No one needed to. Its emptiness had become louder than any accusation. Open budget transfer authorization, Cyrus ordered. Valen gave a small, controlled bow. Certainly, Majesty. Financial context will clarify the intent. That was how he survived each cut of evidence. He made the next wound sound like an explanation. The authorization file came in a green case, stamped with the first scribe's office and the royal treasury mark. The crown recorder opened it on a dry crate, because every proper table in Ashreed paper mill was stained with pulp, ash, or water. Transfer approved, the recorder read. Funds reassigned from flame, retention, maintenance reserve to foreign dignity procurement. Amabel's face did not change. The workers' faces did. A boy near the drying line whispered, "The furnace seals." His mother touched his sleeve too quickly. Cyrus heard. "What furnace seals?" he asked. No one answered at first. Then Amabel did. The east furnace needed dragonbone lining replaced. Without it, heat leaks through the press room. We patched it with clay and reed ash because the maintenance reserve was delayed. Valen's expression softened into public concern. Which supports closure. If Ashreed's conditions were deteriorating, continued royal supply may have endangered workers. Amabel turned slowly toward him. You cut the repair money, then called the smoke proof we should be closed. A murmur went through the mill. Valen's voice remained mild. Mistress Reedon, grief and financial strain can make timelines feel personal. My husband's lungs made the timeline personal. The room stilled. Cyrus looked at her then, and the old furnace light caught the side of his face. She knew that look. It belonged to the man who once read beside her fire because war had made sleep difficult. But this was not a memory she would lend him. Not here. Not while the vats cooled behind her. Open maintenance ledger, Cyrus said. Valen stepped forward. Majesty, worker health records are private. Then read only entries tied to royal maintenance funds. The ledger came from Amabel's locked cabinet. She gave the key to the mill boy, not to Cyrus. The boy carried it with both hands and placed it before the recorder. The pages were stiff with humidity. Reed dust clung along the spine. Beside each repair request were small marks in Amabel's hand. Urgent, delayed, patched, unsafe in winter heat. The recorder read, East furnace lining cracked. Request sent to Royal Maintenance Reserve. No answer. Next line, press room heat leak worsening. 2 workers removed from shift with smoke cough. Request renewed. Next, hazard compensation delayed pending supply review. 1 vat woman wiped her wrist against her apron. Her hand left a streak of gray pulp over old burn scars. Cyrus saw it. He had found injury in the files, not yet relief in the worker's hands. His voice went colder. Open hazard compensation records. Valen's tone sharpened for the first time. Majesty, this review concerns paper procurement, not labor grievance. Amabel answered before Cyrus could. My paper was labor before it was law. The words settled like ash. The compensation file showed names. Dates, cough injuries, furnace burns, reed boil blisters. Delayed payments marked under review because Ashreed supply status uncertain. Cyrus looked at the mill. Really looked. At the women with scarred wrists, at the boys afraid to save curling sheets, at the black channels under the floor, at Amabel standing with her hands folded, not begging for one copper of pity. Amabel Reedon's temporary paper witness standing expands to budget authority, maintenance transfers, and labor hazard records, he said. The mill closure remains pending review. Pending. The word struck harder now. Amabel's eyes lifted to his. Do not expect gratitude, because you have learned the mill had lungs. Cyrus accepted it. Your objection will be recorded. Valen's smile returned thinly. Majesty, granting broader standing to a widow whose household suffered under the old system may confuse personal injury with material fact. Amabel looked at him. My husband died warning the crown that smooth parchment would not hold flame seal ink. For the first time, Cyrus went still before ordering the next file. Open Reedon's reports. The maintenance ledger had a back pocket. Inside lay a smoke-stained sheet, brittle at the fold, written in a man's hard, careful hand. The recorder read the final entry aloud. Reedon warned smooth parchment will shed flame seal ink under sovereign heat. The report did not yet prove who buried the warning. It proved the crown had been warned before it bought the paper that failed. Valen did not deny the words. He only lowered them. A private artisan warning, he said, is not certified material failure. Amabel looked at the smoke-stained sheet and felt no victory in being proven widowed by accuracy. Cyrus could read the warning now, but reading did not return breath to Reedon's lungs or wages to the delayed names. The report did not yet prove who buried the warning. It proved the crown had been warned before it bought the paper that failed. Valenos understood the difference before the room could turn it into judgment. A private artisan warning, he said again, voice lowered into reason, is not certified material failure. Reedon was a skilled man, but skill does not make a household note equal to crown testing. Amabel Reedon looked at the smoke-stained sheet in the recorder's hands. Household note. That was how Valen made a dead man smaller. Not by denying him, by lowering him into a category where his accuracy could be admired and ignored. My husband did not die sentimental, she said. He died correct. The words quieted the mill. Behind her, the cooling vats had begun to skin over. One worker reached for a paddle, then stopped when Valen's closure order shifted in the draft from the open doors. Cyrus Emberley saw that hesitation. He also saw Amabel see him seeing it. That was the worst part. He could no longer pretend the damage existed only in files. Open warning custody, Cyrus ordered. Valen's expression softened. Majesty, with respect, continuing to elevate a widow's private archive, may confuse personal loss with material procedure. Cyrus did not look at him. Then the custody record will clarify whether it stayed private. The recorder unfolded the back sheet attached to Reedon's warning. A red routing mark had bled through the paper, faint but readable beneath furnace light. Submitted to First Scribe's office, the recorder read, 16 days before procurement approval. The mill breathed in. Not loudly. Enough. Valen's face remained composed. Receipt does not equal acceptance. Many supplier objections are logged before reform. Read the office response, Cyrus said. The recorder turned the sheet. Marked. Non-binding artisan objection. No procurement delay recommended. Amabel's fingers curled once at her side. Non-binding. Her husband's breath had been binding enough to leave him in a grave. His warning had not been binding enough to slow a purchase order. Valen spoke to the gathered clerks and workers, not just the king. Crown offices cannot halt modernization because legacy suppliers object to replacement. The objection was recorded. That is proper. Amabel looked at him. Do not call it proper because the file let him die politely. Cyrus's jaw tightened. No apology came. Good. She had no use for one in front of ledgers that had already learned how to delay the living. "Read Reedon's request," Cyrus said. The recorder lowered his eyes to the next entry. Reedon requested sovereign heat test before parchment adoption. Also renewed request for East Furnace dragon bone lining repair. Valen folded his hands. Two separate matters: material concern and maintenance concern. Linking them after his death is emotionally understandable, but not procedurally sound. Amabel turned to him slowly. "The same budget paid for both before you taught it to buy whiteness." A murmur spread through the mill. Cyrus looked at the green budget file, then the maintenance ledger, then the sealed blank decree. The chain was not complete yet, but it had begun to tighten around his own signature. He had signed closure after a warning he never read, after a test that was never done, after a repair reserve had been moved away from the furnace that made his laws survive. He looked at Amabel. She did not give him permission to look wounded. "Open hazard timing after Reedon's report," he said. Valen's tone sharpened. "Majesty, worker compensation will distract from procurement review." "My paper was labor before it was law," Amabel said again. "You do not get to separate the sheet from the lungs that made it." The compensation clerk opened a narrow file tied with gray thread. The first delayed claim came 3 days after Reedon's warning, then another, then 4 more. "Reason for delay," Cyrus said. The clerk swallowed. "Supply status uncertain, pending Ashreed replacement." One of the vat women made a small sound and covered her mouth with pulp-stained fingers. Amabel did not turn toward her. If she did, she might break, and Valen would know exactly how to use that. Cyrus turned to the recorder. "Amabel Reedon's temporary paper, witness standing, expands to warning custody, office response, and compensation chain." Valen inclined his head. "Temporary standing does not reverse closure." "No," Cyrus said. Amabel's eyes cut to him. He accepted the look. Before she spoke. "A king can read a dead man's accuracy and still leave his widow standing unpaid," she said. "Yes," Cyrus answered. The truth had no ornament. It still was not repair. "Your objection will be recorded," he added. "Stop recording my objections as if ink can warm a dead furnace." That one hit him harder. The east furnace groaned in the silence, heat leaking through its patched lining. The boy at the drying line finally lowered his hand from the curling sheet. No one told him to save it. No one told him not to. Valen moved to the compensation file before Cyrus could order more. "Majesty, I recommend adjournment. The environment is deteriorating, and this review has become emotionally charged." Amabel looked at him. "The environment was deteriorating when you cut the repair money." The recorder, still pale, found a folded response note tucked beneath the delayed claims. Cyrus saw the movement. "Read it." Valen's eyes narrowed. The recorder read, "Delay compensation until Ashreed replacement is complete." The compensation note made the mill colder than the open doors. "Delay compensation until Ashreed replacement is complete." No one spoke at first. The sentence was too plain, too useful. It did not mourn Reedon, did not count the women coughing near the vats, did not mention the boy afraid to save a curling sheet. It only waited for replacement to make injury cheaper. Valenos recovered with the calm of a man who trusted wording more than conscience. "Administrative timing," he said. "Not cruelty. Compensation tied to a closing supplier must be reconciled after transition. Otherwise, duplicate liability may burden the treasury." Amabel Reedon looked at him. "You delayed wages because my workers might stop being useful before you finished replacing them. That is an emotional framing. It is a human one." The vat woman with scarred wrists lowered her paddle. The sound of wood against the rim carried through the mill. Cyrus Emberley heard it. He also heard what his silence had purchased. Open transition liability records, he ordered. Valen's jaw tightened. Majesty, those records belong to administrative settlement, not paper certification. They delayed compensation while my law went blank. Open them. The file was small. That made it worse. A large cruelty should have looked larger. Instead, it had been folded into neat columns. Wages pending. Injury pending. Supply replacement pending. Foreign presentation pending. Then came a line written in blue ink. Imported parchment permits post-signature correction without sheet loss. Cyrus went still. Amabel did not. She stepped closer to the witness table, stopping before any court clerk could mistake movement for permission to handle her. Read the whole entry. The recorder obeyed. Imported parchment permits post-signature correction without sheet loss. Ink may be lifted, wording revised, and royal signature retained if seal remains intact. The mill changed around the words. Not loud, deep. The workers understood before the clerks did. They worked with materials. They knew what it meant when a surface could be cleaned without tearing. Valen lifted one gloved hand. Correction capacity is common in modern administration. Minor clerical errors can be repaired without wasting signed sheets. Amabel looked at the sealed blank decree. A law that can be corrected after signing can also be rewritten after signing. Valen's expression sharpened. That is accusation without proof. No, she said. That is material behavior. Cyrus turned toward the imported parchment. Can the ink be lifted after my signature? Valen answered quickly. Under controlled conditions, perhaps. For corrections, was I told? The first scribe's office manages scribal properties. That is not an answer. Valen's face cooled. Then no, Majesty. It was not presented as a sovereign concern. Amabel's mouth tightened. Because a king who knows his words can be moved might ask who benefits from movable law. Cyrus looked at her. There was pain in him now, but Amabel refused to tend it. She had tended furnaces, ledgers, workers, and a dying husband. She was done tending a king's late understanding. Open correction trials, Cyrus said. Valen's voice lowered. Majesty, open them. The correction trial packet was sealed with the importer's blue ribbon. Inside were thin sample strips, white as bone. The recorder read each test. Trial 1. Royal ink lifted with warm oil wash. Wording replaced. Signature unaffected. A clerk made a sound. Trial 2. Flame. Seal surface reheated. Old wording released. New wording accepted. Cyrus's eyes hardened. Accepted by what heat source? Clerk. Lamp heat. Amabel almost laughed. The same small false fire again. Trial 3, the recorder continued. Dragon reed comparison. Attempted correction failed. Ink locked beneath fiber. Sheet damaged before wording released. Valen spoke smoothly. Which proves dragon reed paper is inefficient for necessary administrative correction. Amabel's gaze cut to him. It proves my paper does not let a signed law change clothes after the king leaves the room. The line struck Cyrus visibly. He looked at the handmade book, still half visible in his memory. The blank pages he had once trusted because they held silence without asking anything of him. Now he understood another kind of holding. Her paper held because it refused to let heat take words away. He had closed that refusal. Amabel Reedon's temporary paper, witness standing, expands to correction trials, transition liability, and post-signature material behavior, he said. All imported parchment decrees are suspended pending review. The court clerks broke into alarm. Valen stepped closer. Majesty, suspending decrees will freeze administration. Then administration can learn what it has been writing on. Amabel looked at him. Do not make this sound like courage yet. You are suspending paper after the paper embarrassed you. My mill remains closed. Yes, Cyrus said. Again, no defense. Still not enough. Valen's voice regained command. Majesty, may I remind the room that no altered decree has been shown. We have only correction capacity, which every modern court requires. Cyrus turned to the archive clerk. Bring the first decree issued on imported parchment. The clerk hesitated. There are several, Majesty. The first. A folded sheet was brought from Valen's carriage. It bore Cyrus's signature, intact and dark, beneath a foreign white surface. The recorder read the title, Restoration Order for Burned Village Lands. Amabel's eyes lifted. Cyrus's face did not change until the clerk opened a small attached ash reed draft scrap used for wording transfer. The dragon reed scrap glowed gray gold. The imported decree said the burned lands were to be placed under noble stewardship. The old dragon reed wording beneath the heat said they were to be returned to surviving families. By dusk, the first survivors from the burned villages were standing outside Ash Reed Paper Mill. No one had summoned them. News traveled faster than royal shame. They came with soot still dark in the hems of their coats, with children wrapped against furnace wind, with old boundary cords tied around their wrists because paper claims could be stolen, but memory sometimes needed something to hold. They did not enter. They stood beyond the mill doors, staring at the sealed imported decree on the witness table. Restoration Order for Burned Village Lands. On imported parchment, noble stewardship. On the dragon reed scrap, return to surviving families. Valen Os looked toward the villagers with controlled displeasure. Majesty, this environment is becoming unsuitable for orderly review. Amabel Reedon's voice cut through the wet heat. Because the public came to hear what your public trust bought? Valen turned toward her. Because grief gathers quickly around incomplete evidence. One of the village women outside lifted her chin. Our houses burned complete enough. The mill went quiet. Cyrus Emberley stood with the altered decree in front of him, and the old dragon reed wording glowing beside it. His face had gone still in the way. Kings became dangerous when their anger finally found a shape. But anger did not restore land. It did not reopen vats. It did not pay lungs. Amabel knew better than to trust a man merely because he was finally furious on the right side. Bring all burned. Land decrees issued on imported parchment, Cyrus ordered. Valen's voice sharpened. Majesty, broad review without archive conditions risks panic. Panic belongs to those whose land was moved while my signature stayed still. The first courier left running. The workers watched him go. Then all eyes returned to Amabel's vats, because everyone in the room understood the same ugly possibility. If imported parchment could be changed, the kingdom would need dragon reed paper at once. It would need her mill, her hands, her workers, her furnace, the smoke they had called primitive before the clean sheets failed. Valen saw it too. He softened his voice. Mistress Reedon, given the urgent public interest, the Crown may require temporary production support while review continues. Amabel looked at him. There it was. Not respect. Need. You closed my mill in the morning, she said. By evening, you wanted to save the words your clean paper could not hold. Cyrus looked at her, but he did not speak. Good. He had no right to answer before she finished. Valen folded his hands. No one denies the usefulness of legacy stock in emergency comparison. Legacy stock, she repeated. Not lawcraft, not skilled labor, not workers owed hazard pay. Stock. A vat woman near the furnace lowered her paddle at last. The sound struck the rim like a small verdict. Cyrus turned to Valen. Do not request production from a closed mill as if closure has no consequence. Valen's eyes cooled. Then reopen it, Majesty. The room held its breath. Amabel's heart hurt despite herself. There it was again, the court trying to make her dignity into a switch Cyrus could turn back on when the kingdom needed heat. Cyrus did not take the bait. The royal contract remains under review, he said. Pain moved through the workers' faces. Amabel felt it too. Still pending. Still not restored. Still not repaired. But then Cyrus added, colder, and no crown officer will compel labor from Ashreed while its closure, compensation, and material standard remain disputed. Valen's mouth tightened. Without production, decree review will slow. Then it slows. The villagers outside heard that. So did Amabel. It was the first useful restraint he had shown all day. It did not make him forgiven. Only less dangerous than he had been that morning. Amabel walked to the east furnace and set her hand against the patched dragonbone lining. Heat leaked unevenly through clay and reed ash, stinging the old burns on her palm. Cyrus stepped once, as if to stop her from hurting herself, then stopped. She saw the stop. So did he. Learning not to touch what you let them close? She asked. His voice was low. Learning that needing your work does not give me a right to your hands. The words settled between them with a tenderness neither could afford. Valen cut through it. Mistress Reedon, if you refuse emergency cooperation, villages may remain unsettled longer. Amabel turned. Do not place your delay in my apron. A murmur moved through the villagers. My workers will not boil another crown sheet tonight, she said. Not while their injuries are pending, their furnace is unsafe, and their craft is still called obsolete whenever it is not convenient. Cyrus's face tightened, but he nodded once. Recorded. Stop recording, she said. Start deciding what law is worth without the people who make it survive. She removed the mill key from the hook beside the vat room door. The workers stared. Amabel looked at them one by one. Go home. No one touches crown stock until the crown learns whether it wants paper or obedience. No one cheered. They were too tired for that. They only began to move. Slowly, gathering shawls, tools, lunch tins, children, cough cloths. The mill emptied by degrees. Its wet heat thinning as paddles left vats and drying lines stopped trembling. Cyrus stood in the center of what he had closed. For the first time, it looked like loss around him. A palace messenger arrived before the final worker crossed the threshold. He was pale from running, one hand clenched around 3 white decree rolls. Majesty, he gasped. The record room tested the burned land decrees under archive flame. Valen's eyes flickered. The messenger held out the rolls. All 3 imported copies changed wording after signature. Amabel stopped at the mill door. The messenger swallowed. And every original wording was found on Ashreed transfer scraps. The 3 white decree rolls did not make Valenos guilty by themselves. They made the kingdom harder to quiet. All 3 imported copies changed wording after signature. All 3 original wordings were found on Ashreed transfer scraps. The villagers outside Ashreed paper mill heard it before the court clerks could lower their voices. A sound moved through them. Not a shout, not yet a riot. It was the sound of people realizing their loss had been written twice, once in fire, once in ink. Valen turned toward the messenger with controlled severity. Archive flame is not sovereign dragonfire. Transfer scraps are not enacted law. They are production remnants, useful perhaps for comparison, but not binding. Amabel Reedon stood at the mill door with the key in her hand. Useful perhaps, she said. That is what you call truth when it comes from a scrap instead of a polished roll. Valen faced the crowd. The realm cannot be governed by fragments from a closed mill. Cyrus Emberley looked at the villagers, then at the white decrees. then at Amabel's workers, waiting to leave with unpaid injuries and ash under their nails. No, he said. It cannot be governed by paper that changes after I sign it. The line cut through Valen's composure. Majesty, broad suspension will damage confidence. Confidence in what? Valen paused. Cyrus's voice hardened. In decrees no one can trust after flame touches them. The villagers pressed closer to the open doors. A noble clerk whispered that the burned land houses would challenge the crown. Another warned that foreign envoys were already waiting on newly issued white decrees. Every warning sounded like protection for the paper, not for the people beneath it. Cyrus turned to the crown recorders. All decrees issued on imported parchment are suspended pending material verification against Ashreed transfer scraps, old dragon reed files, and sovereign flame testing. Valen stepped forward. That will halt trade licenses, land settlements, tax remissions. Then they halt. Amabel watched him. This was the first act that cost him more than comfort. It cost him the image of a clean court. It cost him administrative ease. It cost him the illusion that a king's signature could remain in. Still, she did not warm. A king could freeze half his paperwork and still have closed her mill in front of her workers. Cyrus turned to the treasury clerk. Release all delayed hazard compensation tied to Ashreed immediately. Valen's head turned. Majesty, from the Foreign Dignity Procurement Reserve. That silenced even the water wheel. The vat woman with scarred wrists stared at Cyrus, as if she did not trust the words enough to breathe near them. Amabel did not thank him. Cyrus did not look at her as if he expected it. Good. He looked at the workers. The furnace repair reserve is restored. East furnace dragonbone lining will be replaced before any crown production is requested. Valen recovered. If Ashreed is not yet reinstated, treasury release may imply liability before review concludes. Cyrus looked at him. Liability began. Valen's voice sharpened under its polish. You are accepting blame before facts are complete. No, Cyrus said. I am accepting responsibility for the part already clear. Amabel felt those words strike somewhere dangerous. Not forgiveness. Recognition. She turned away from it before it could soften anything in her. My workers are not buying your conscience, she said. Cyrus looked at her then. No. And repaired furnaces do not restore the name you let him dirty. No. And suspended decrees do not make my husband less dead. His face tightened. No. The third answer was almost too quiet, and that made it worse. He was learning not to defend himself. He was learning to stand under the sentence without reaching for her hand. Valen used the silence. Mistress Reedon's grief now directs treasury, archive, and decree enforcement. This is precisely why court procedure exists to protect law from emotional capture. Amabel stepped back into the mill. Not far. Enough to stand beside the sealed blank decree, not outside the room where her work had been judged. My grief did not change the decrees, she said. Your parchment did. A murmur crossed the villagers. Cyrus turned to the recorders. Open a public decree audit at Ashreed under witness. Villagers whose land was transferred under imported parchment will be heard first. Valen went very still. Public audit inside a supplier mill? In the place where the surviving wording can be compared. The palace archive is the lawful seat. The palace archive issued altered rolls without noticing. The line landed like a hammer. Amabel looked at Cyrus. He had just wounded his own palace in public. That was an act of repair. Not enough, but real. A burned village woman stepped to the threshold. Majesty, if the scrap says return to families, do we go home? Cyrus did not answer quickly. That mattered too. No decree will be enforced until tested under sovereign flame and matched against original transfer wording, he said. No noble stewardship claim stands without review. The woman's face crumpled with hope she was afraid to trust. Valen's eyes flickered toward the decree rolls. And if Ashreed's scraps are incomplete? Amabel heard the trap. A closed mill could be blamed for missing evidence it had been ordered to surrender. She lifted the key. Then the Crown will learn why closing a working archive is not reform. Cyrus looked at the key, then at her. I will request access, he said. Not command. Request. The whole mill heard the difference. Amabel's throat tightened, and she hated that it did. You may request, she said. I may refuse. Yes. Valen smiled faintly. If she refuses, Majesty, your public audit collapses. Amabel looked at the villagers outside, at workers with unpaid lungs, at Cyrus standing crowned still beneath the consequences of his own signature. Then she opened the mill office door herself. Inside, stacked beneath oilcloth, were bundles of dragon reed transfer scraps from every royal law sheet Ashreed had produced. Amabel touched the top bundle. These were never palace property, she said. They were the mill's memory. A folded note lay on the first bundle in her husband's hand. The recorder read it aloud. If palace copies ever differ, print the mill wording where citizens can read it. Amabel Reedon did not weep when her husband's note was read. That would have pleased the room too much. Grief, once public, became a thing officials could classify. Useful widow, unstable widow, brave widow, difficult widow. Amabel had lived long enough inside smoke and law to know that every label was another way of reaching for her hands. So she only took the note from the recorder and folded it along the old crease. Reedon had written it for her. Not for the palace. Not for Cyrus. Not for any court that had needed a blank decree before it believed a dead worker. Valen Oss looked at the bundles beneath the oilcloth. Mill transfer scraps are internal production remnants. They cannot be used to publish Crown law. Amabel placed her palm on the top bundle. They already held Crown law before your clean parchment forgot it. Unofficially. No, she said, before alteration. The villagers at the threshold shifted closer. Cyrus Emberley stood near the office door, his face shadowed by furnace glow. The heat caught the black edge of his armor and made him look carved from something harder than regret. Amabel, he said quietly, what do you intend? She looked at him. That was the wrong question from a man who had closed her mill before asking what her work did. Still, it was better than command. I intend to print the laws where citizens can compare them. Valen's answer came at once. Unauthorized publication of royal decrees is sedition. Amabel almost smiled. So is changing them after the king signs. The workers behind her breathed in like a single body. Cyrus did not speak quickly. Good. Quick protection could still become possession. Valen turned to him. Majesty, if you allow a displaced supplier to publish competing legal editions, every clerk, tax collector, and village reeve will question palace authority. Amabel lifted one dragon reed transfer scrap. The gray fibers caught furnace light, dull, and stubborn. Then perhaps palace authority should learn to survive being read. A murmur moved through the villagers. The burned village woman from before stepped forward. Mistress Reedon, if you print it, can we carry it home? Valen cut in. Home remains under review. The woman's face went still. Amabel looked at her. If the mill wording says return to surviving families, you will have that wording in your hands before night ends. Valen's composure thinned. You cannot promise legal standing. No, Amabel said. I can promise no one will have to wait outside a palace door while polished men decide whether truth is presentable. Cyrus looked at the handpress in the back of the office. He remembered it. Of course he did. Years ago, before Crown Weight taught him to prefer clean halls, He had watched Amabel feed damp sheets through that press while Reedon laughed at him for standing too close to the rollers. Cyrus had held one fresh blank page then, amazed that something made from ash could feel so soft. You made silence hold. The memory crossed his face. Amabel saw it and did not give it shelter. "Do not remember my mill tenderly now," she said, "not while its contract is still dead." His eyes lifted to hers. "I will not ask tenderness from what I helped injure." The words were low. They reached her anyway. She hated that. Valen seized the moment. "Majesty, restore the royal contract under emergency supervision. Bring Ashreed under palace control until review concludes. That would solve both production and publication risk." There it was. A kinder chain. Amabel's hand tightened around the scrap. "No." Cyrus looked at her. She turned fully toward him. "I refuse the old royal contract." The room changed. Workers looked up. Villagers stared. Even Valen lost one breath of timing. Amabel continued, voice steady. "I will not return to a private supply chain where the palace can praise my paper in silence, shame my mill in public, and bury my husband's warnings in office categories." Valen's eyes sharpened. "Then you admit refusal of lawful restoration." "I refuse restoration as a leash." Cyrus held still. The words struck him, but he did not defend the leash. "What terms?" he asked. Valen snapped. "Majesty?" Cyrus did not look at him. "What terms, Amabel Reedon?" Her name again. "Not widow. Not supplier. Not stain. Still not enough. But exact." "The public edition stands," she said. "Every flame-sealed law printed for Palace Archive must have a citizen copy on dragon reed paper, stored outside the palace. Every material used for royal decrees must face sovereign dragonfire before contract approval. Every Ashreed worker is compensated before crown production resumes. Reedon's warning enters the official material record." Valen's voice went cold. "You are attempting to rewrite the structure of crown law from a mill office." Amabel looked at the handpress. "No. I am refusing to let crown law remain trapped on paper that can be rewritten in rooms citizens cannot enter." Cyrus turned to the recorders. "Record her terms." Valen stepped forward. "If you record them as negotiation, you weaken the crown." "No," Cyrus said. "If I refuse to hear them, I repeat the mistake that brought us here." Amabel did not thank him. She crossed to the handpress herself. The workers waited. She looked at them. "No one is ordered to work. Anyone who stays does so for citizen copies, not crown stock." The vat woman with scarred wrists stepped forward first. "For citizen copies," she said. Then the boy. Then 3 more. The mill began to move again, not as royal obedience, but as chosen witness. Pulp was stirred. Damp sheets were lifted. Transfer scraps were aligned beside fresh dragon reed pages. Amabel set the first Burnland decree into the press. Cyrus watched from the doorway, outside the work, where he belonged. When the first public edition came free, gold wording rose through gray fiber. Restoration order for burned village lands. Return to surviving families. Then, beneath it, a second line surfaced, one that had not appeared on the palace copy. Post-signature alteration authorized through first scribe correction channel. The new line on the public edition did not make Valenos confess. It made confession unnecessary. Post-signature alteration authorized through first scribe correction channel. The words glowed in the gray dragon reed fiber beneath the burned land order, not as judgment, not as mercy, but as material memory. The paper had taken every layer of flame seal ink into itself. What the imported parchment lifted away, dragon reed held below the surface where heat could not make it disappear. Valen stared at the line for one controlled breath. Then he reached for law. Correction channels exist for clerical repair, he said. The presence of an authorization line does not prove unlawful alteration. It proves administrative structure. Amabel Reedon stood beside the hand press, sleeves rolled, ash on her cheek, widow's black darkened by mill steam. Then open the structure. Cyrus Emberley turned to the recorders. Bring the first scribe correction logs, burned, land decree custody, and all post-signature alteration notices. Valen's voice sharpened. Majesty, those records contain active palace procedure. They contain my signature being used after my words were moved. The villagers outside the mill heard that. So did the nobles. So did the workers whose hands had begun, slowly, to trust the press again. The logs arrived in a locked iron chest from Valen's carriage. He had brought them near enough to control the review, not expecting Ashreed to turn into a court with wet floors and witnesses who smelled of smoke. The first correction log listed small changes: spelling, village boundary mark, tax code number. The second named the burned land decrees. The recorder's voice shook. Original wording: return to surviving families. Corrected wording: placed under noble stewardship until stability review. The burned village woman at the door covered her mouth. Valen stepped forward. Temporary stewardship is lawful after disaster. Amabel looked at him. Then why remove the word families after Cyrus signed it? Valen's mouth tightened. Because governance must respond to conditions. Cyrus took one step toward the table. Who authorized the correction? The recorder turned the page. First scribe correction channel. Marked urgent. No sovereign reapproval required if signature intact. The mill went silent. Not because anyone failed to understand. Because everyone did. Valen raised his chin. The channel predates me. I used lawful instruments. You used movable ink, Amabel said, and your paper prevents efficient correction. My paper prevents a signed law from becoming a stranger to itself. That line moved through the mill like heat through reed fiber. Cyrus looked at the imported decree, then at the Dragon Reed Public Edition. Test them both under sovereign fire. Valen turned sharply. Majesty, now. No clerk lamp this time. No candle edge proximity. No clean office flame pretending to be dragonfire. Cyrus drew a thin blade across his thumb and let one drop of royal blood fall into the seal lamp. Dragonfire woke blue gold inside the glass, old and hungry. The workers stepped back. The villagers pressed close. Amabel stayed beside the press. The imported parchment went first. The flame touched the seal. The altered wording blurred. Not all at once. That would have been easier to dismiss. It loosened delicately, politely, the way fine men undid harm while calling it correction. Noble stewardship thinned into smoke. Cyrus's signature remained. Then Amabel placed the Dragon Reed Public Edition beneath the flame. Nothing vanished. The gray fibers darkened, drank the heat, and held. Return to surviving families stayed bright. Post-signature alteration authorized through first scribe correction channel stayed bright. The material did not choose Amabel. It proved her craft had been doing the work the palace called sacred. Cyrus turned to the mill, the villagers, the clerks, and the court officials crowded at the doors. Let this stand in crown record, he said. I closed Ashreed before asking why its paper never failed. I trusted clean review over skilled labor. I accepted appearance as preservation. I allowed first scribe Valenos to shame a widow's mill while his office used paper that could move my laws after I signed them. No one interrupted. Not even fallen. Cyrus continued. All imported parchment decrees are suspended. All burned, land orders altered through correction channel are void. Surviving families retain claim until public audit confirms original wording. A cry broke outside. Not joy yet. Relief too wounded to stand straight. Cyrus faced the treasury clerk. Hazard compensation for Ashreed workers is released today. Reedon's warning enters the official Crown material record. His household receives the delayed compensation with public correction of cause. Amabel's throat tightened. She hated that it did. My husband did not need your pity, she said. No, Cyrus answered. He needed me to read what he warned before I signed him into silence. That was not apology. It was heavier. He turned back to the recorders. Ashreed Paper Mill is recognized as royal lawcraft, not primitive supply. Dragon reed paper is required for flame-sealed law unless another material survives sovereign dragonfire before contract approval. Foreign presentation rules cannot override law survival. Valen's face paled at last. You give us supplier power over crown law. Amabel stepped forward. No. I give citizens a way to know when crown law has been changed. She lifted the first public edition and placed it in the Burn Village woman's hands. Take it home. The woman held the gray sheet as if it were bread. Then Amabel faced Cyrus. I refuse the old private contract. The court stirred. Cyrus did not. I heard you, he said. I will supply citizen editions through Ashreed under public standard, worker authority, and sovereign fire testing. The palace may purchase law sheets from the mill, but it will not own the mill's memory. Recorded, he said. And Valen does not oversee correction channels again. Cyrus turned to the guards. First Scribe Valen Oss is removed from office, pending tribunal for misuse of correction authority, concealment of material risk, budget misdirection, and delayed worker compensation. Valen did not beg. He only looked at Amabel with cold respect, which was worse than hatred. This will make law slower, he said. Amabel answered, Good. Let lies learn to wait. The guards took him. The mill did not cheer. It worked. That was better. The hand press rolled. Workers fed damp dragon reed sheets through copper jaws. Villagers received public editions one by one. Names returned to land. Wages returned to hands. Reedon's warning, copied on flame-tested paper, was pinned beside the mill door where every royal clerk could read it before asking Smoke to apologize for being useful. Only after the crowd thinned did Cyrus approach Amabel near the east furnace. He stopped several steps away. I cannot ask for the chair beside your fire again, he said. No, I cannot ask you to make silence hold for me. No. His eyes lowered to her scarred hands. Then I will make the law hold your work, whether you ever let me near the furnace again or not. Amabel looked at him for a long time. The man who had closed her mill now stood outside the heat, waiting to be refused. That mattered. It did not decide everything. I will write the public standard, she said. I will oversee the first audit. After that, I choose what the crown gets from me. Cyrus bowed his head. After that you choose. Amabel turned back to the press, where the next sheet came through warm, gray, and alive with words no flame could lift away. For the first time that day, the mill did not sound closed. It sounded like law learning whose hands had kept it true.